Thank you so much for having us. I am here with my coffee at 4:30 in the morning, and it's been a pleasure to be here as it was last year too. So thanks for having us both again. Renee and I really were grappling with this idea of success recently, and we just are excited about the opportunity to share with you some of the things that we've come up with over the last few weeks that we've been talking about this. So before we start, I would love to know, and Renee would love to know, what is your definition of success? And if you could just drop that in the chat, that would be helpful for us as we continue on with this conversation. And I actually think it ties really nicely into what Nicole ended her presentation about. Renee and I were kind of chit-chatting during the break a little bit about, this is kind of a nice segue into really what it means to be successful. So as you do that, we're gonna just introduce ourselves.
Hello, I'm Renée Duncan, and I am originally from Australia, but I have been living in New York for the past 8 years. I am currently a band director and classroom general music teacher in New York City. And I'm also the webmaster for the Music Education Association of New York City, and a very proud former student of Diana. And tying back into some of the really good questions that were being asked in the previous presentation, one of the things that I remember most and value most from my time with Diana was just how many questions she asked me and how thoughtful they were and how large of an impact they really had on my decisions moving forward. And so I think sometimes questions, we can really take them for granted, and it's really easy to take time, or the lack of time, to think about what we actually are interested in and what we define important things in our life as, such as success. So I know we're really looking forward to seeing, gosh, that's hard. Yes, we're here to ask some hard questions, but there's no pressure. We're really just wanting to explore this with you. So Jen?
Yes, great. And I'm actually struggling a little bit to see the chat, Renee, so I'm going to leave you to that if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, my shared screen is not as cooperative today. So I'm Jen Rafferty. I actually spent a semester at Griffith University. In my last semester, I was one of those who went overseas, but the opposite way. And it was a fantastic time of my life. And it's great to be able to reconnect in that way to university. So I am a TEDx speaker. I am an author, podcast host, and founder of Empowered Educator, which now works with teachers and school leaders and focuses on the social and emotional well-being of the adults in schools. And prior to that, I was a music teacher for 15 years as a choir director, general music teacher, as well as several other things in the department over my career. So I'm really excited to talk about this today because success was always something that seemed a bit elusive for me in a way that I wasn't sure was healthy, and never really had the opportunity to ask these questions until recently.
I'm seeing some fantastic responses in the chat. I'm going to read them to you, Jen.
Yeah, thank
really
you.
Quickly.
Oh, sorry, Darwin.
So Eden says success is having a fulfilling career, able to sustain yourself financially, managing work-life balance. Helen thinks Eden nailed it. James says, oh gosh, that's hard. I guess something to do with achieving whatever one reasonably sets out to achieve. And Celia added on, maybe knowing what you want to achieve, though she feels she never did. Diana says, some days it's touching my toes, other days it's aligning values with actions. Christine says, it's being very true to yourself and your goals. It might involve tough questions, but that would be richly rewarding. Peter says, success, no such thing. Very fleeting. Can have successes, though. These are such good, interesting responses. James adds on, I'm not sure work-life balance really exists. Ruth says that balance changes all the time, very fluid, or success does. Brad says, I'm with Pete. I'm not sure success fail thing is helpful. And Nicole finishes off with living whatever you think is a good life.
Wow, what a beautiful continuum of answers. I love all of them. Thank you for all of those responses. It kind of gets my brain thinking a little bit too. Renee, why don't you take this first? Because my brain's still thinking.
Well, I definitely think that we're going to touch on some of these things in our presentation because we had some very, very similar thoughts. And I think that there's definitely responses here that are talking about internal thoughts and feelings and defining success as something that is what is important to you. And then there are some external factors, such as finances, aligning things as best as you can and being richly rewarding. All of these things are extraordinarily interesting. And I think that it can sometimes be very hard when we're thinking about success to come up with one definition that stays the same. And I see a lot of people also saying that it could be fleeting and it can be fluid and all the things, Jen.
Yes. So, I think it is really important that we take a look at what are the external factors that we are measuring for success versus some of these internal factors that we're measuring for success. And that's, I think, where the grappling begins for us, at least it did when we first started having this conversation, as, when we are placing a lot of our ideas of happiness, and I'm using the word happiness as almost synonymous with this idea of success, because it feels good to feel successful, right? We want to feel successful. That's something that gets all the good feels going inside. And when we are allowing our idea of success and therefore happiness to exist solely on external factors, it becomes a little bit as if we're constantly chasing this outside thing outside of ourselves, that most of those things we actually don't really have control over, right? I mean, if you're taking a look at some of the things that, I wrote them down, finances, we don't always have control over that. Your career path is not always something that we have control over. Enter the pandemic 2 years ago, right? Even saying something as, no such thing. I think that is an interesting way of looking at it also, because why is it then so elusive for you? So Renée, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that it's thinking about our own metrics of successes. I wonder, what do these metrics say about our mindset? Are some of these things really serving us best? And we're kind of thinking about, if that is your definition of success, then how can you be mindful and really understand exactly why you think that way, and try to think, is that how you want to feel? Do you want to feel like there's no such thing as success? Is that where you want to be situated? And if so, wonderful. That is your internal choice, and it's all about a choice. And if it's not, then how might you find some other different ways to reconsider the idea of success, flip it on its head, maybe redefine it so that you can be exactly where you want to be?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's just asking the questions, because at the end of the day, right before you go to bed, it feels great to just be like, I did it, and when we consider all of these external factors, we are literally giving away that power. We're abdicating our power of that feeling of happiness or success to all of these external things, whether or not we got the job or the gig, right? How well our students performed at that audition, the outcome of the difficult conversation we had to have with a colleague, all of which really, we don't really have a whole lot of control of, and is that equivalent then to our success? And I think a lot of the conversation that led, or our conversation led to this idea of feeling as if we're coming from a place of wholeness already. What if success was just being? What if the measure of success is that you were able to wake up and feel the way you want to feel for as many hours of the day as possible? And as we were kind of defining our own successes, that was something that came up quite a bit, for me, is my definition of success, because I needed to change my definition of success because I was constantly feeling unsuccessful.
I'm curious if in the chat, while we continue this discussion, if you would look back at your definitions of success as you put them into the chat, we would love for you to think about those definitions and to see if you can dig a little deeper and tell us, how would you measure knowing that you found that work-life balance, or that you found that your values were aligning with your actions? How do you know that? How would you think you would be aware that you had reached that definition of success? And I think that's where it can be a little challenging, or at least I find it that way. Jen asked me to define my definition, and she had this beautiful, eloquent one that she just spoke about feeling the way she wants to feel for as many hours in a day. And I found that I couldn't articulate my definition of success nearly so holistically. I think of success more compartmentalized. I think about different parts of my world. Am I successful in relation to my career goals, in relation to how my students are doing, my academic work, my personal life? And I think more about everything on that lower level, as opposed to thinking about overall, do I feel successful? And how do I feel about whatever my answer to that question might be? And I'm still not very sure. But now that I'm starting to ask the questions, I feel like I'm one step closer to being able to connect with something that will help push my life forward in a more positive direction.
Right. And that's just it. For me, prior to doing some of this questioning work, especially as a musician and a performer and a music educator, a lot of my validation of success had to do with, how loud was the applause? Did I get the standing ovation? Did I get the standing ovation 2 nights in a row or 3 nights in a row? Did, the parents come up to me after the concert and say, thank you, Jen, great job? I felt like I was just constantly chasing that. And whereas when I really started to do this work, and I thought to myself, okay, well, what if I wasn't looking for that happiness or that feeling of success outside? What if I was able to create it inside first? And from my experience, coming from a place of wholeness and happiness first, or success first, that, I have the agency in standing in my power to decide how I want to feel, I was actually able to show up in all of these places and spaces so much differently, because it didn't matter whether or not I got the standing ovation. It didn't matter if a parent came up to me at the end and said, good job. It didn't matter, whether or not I had a certain amount of money in my bank account. that was no longer the measure of success. It really started with, how do I want to feel first? And then everything else aligned to that thing. So I can't see the chat, Renee. I'm really curious.
No, just we have a 3-minute warning, but no chat.
Oh, okay. I saw your
and so, if we take away that external validation, and if we really start to think about, well, what do we think internally, and what is it that we want to feel when we are feeling successful? What would change? What would change about how I teach my students? And what might change about, as a performer, if I'm performing, what might change about that? How might the art that I create, or the performances, the work, the curriculum, what would it look like if I was following my path and not so focused on what other people thought?
For sure. And for me too, this came in with a lot of I should want this. I should want to feel as if the applause is validating something for me. But when I started going deeper, as soon as you start to use that word should, that's usually not yours. That's usually somebody else's opinion in your head. So, we came up with these 3 clear ideas and steps to take to just get a little bit more comfortable asking some of these questions, and start noticing a little bit more about, how do we even feel about success? So for me, one of the first things that I did to kind of start me on this journey was I set 3 alarms throughout the day. And what that did is that it interrupted my day and actually got me thinking, what am I feeling at this moment? What am I thinking at this moment? Because we are on autopilot and default mode all day. And in order to start really asking some of these questions, most of which live in our subconscious, we need to bring awareness to those moments. So setting the alarms throughout the day is really just about pausing for a moment, what was I thinking? What was I feeling? And that's an important step in noticing, because we can't change anything we don't notice.
And then making that conscious effort to think about, well, this is how we are feeling, but how do we want to feel? Do something, do the thing that will make you feel good in that moment or a little bit further down the track. I had a professor say something to me once that was so simple and so powerful to me. And it was just, if you don't like where you're at, you're not a tree, move. And that seems such a strange thing to say, but that really resonated with me.
Yeah, I know. I think it's great. We're not trees. We can go do a thing, and if you notice in those moments that you're not feeling the way you want to feel, what do you want to feel? For me, it's calm. For me, it's connected, in a moment where I'm pausing and all of a sudden I feel a little bit of a dip. How do I add 10% more calm into this situation? And then just go do that thing, and so then the last thing is just take a moment to just notice when you're feeling successful or when you're not feeling successful. And the more you're able to collect that data, the more you're able to, again, make changes because you have that information readily available for you.
Absolutely. And this process can be messy. Whenever we're pushing back against our identity and the ego there's always a little bit of pushback and it takes time. But we just would like to say thank you for having us today and exploring this conversation with us.